In this gripping story on Warming Tales Frias, we uncover a shocking incident involving a police officer who crosses the line with a black woman. What starts as an abusive power move quickly spirals. This eye-opening narrative challenges issues of justice, racial bias, and integrity in law enforcement. Watch now to experience this powerful story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more impactful tales, additional uplifting and significant narratives.
It was late one Friday evening, well past the time she usually left work. The week had been long and exhausting. Tatiana had spent countless hours dealing with budget meetings, operational updates, and the never-ending reports that landed on her desk. But this evening she was finally on her way home, ready to unwind and spend the weekend away from the chaos of her daily responsibilities. She hadn't even changed out of her uniform, a simple but sharp navy blue ensemble, adorned with the badge that represented her rank, though not immediately noticeable from afar. As she drove through the city streets, she found herself in one of the more troubled areas. This particular district had recently been under scrutiny due to a string of crimes, some violent, some petty, but all signs of a community in distress. The police had been conducting operations here for the last few weeks, trying to stem the tide of rising criminal activity. Although Tatiana had overseen the planning of these operations, she rarely found herself on the ground level anymore. Tonight, however, she had taken a detour to a gas station in the area, a small, run-down establishment that looked like it had seen better days. Her gas tank was nearly empty, and this was the closest stop before home. Unbeknownst to her, Officer Paul Riley was also in the area. Riley, a patrol cop in his mid-30s, had been with the force for nearly 10 years. But unlike Tatiana, his career had not been one of steady ascension. Paul had joined the police force with aspirations of making a name for himself. He had envisioned rapid promotions, the respect of his peers, and maybe even a position of authority one day. However, reality had been far less kind. Over the years, Paul had developed a growing sense of frustration. His personal life was a mess, his marriage on the rocks, his finances a wreck, and his professional reputation slowly deteriorating. Paul had always harbored a subtle but deep-seated resentment for people who he believed didn't belong in certain places. His upbringing in a small, predominantly white town had not exposed him to much diversity, and he had grown to associate certain racial and socioeconomic stereotypes with danger or criminality. This bias had, over time, hardened into something darker, though Paul would never admit it aloud. He was convinced that his instincts were always right, even when they were based on nothing more than his prejudices. That evening, as Paul patrolled the area in his squad car, he noticed a black woman, Tatiana, pulling into the gas station. It was a routine sight, but something about it bothered him. The woman didn't fit into the image he had of this neighborhood. To him, she seemed out of place, as though her presence in this part of town meant trouble. He couldn't see her badge or rank from where he was parked, but his assumptions took over. To Paul, this was just another person who didn't belong. Tatiana parked her car and stepped out to fuel up. She was tired and ready to get home, but she remained vigilant, as she always did. The gas station was dimly lit, and a few other cars were scattered around, some occupants loitering, some just passing through. Paul watched her closely, his mind racing with unfounded suspicions. He knew the area had been a hotspot for illegal activity, and in his twisted reasoning, this woman had to be involved in something. He decided to act. Without calling it in or informing his dispatcher, Paul pulled his patrol car around, approaching Tatiana's vehicle with his lights flashing. Tatiana, taken aback by the sudden attention, looked up from the gas pump. She saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror and sighed. This wasn't the first time she'd been stopped for no apparent reason, though it was rare for her to experience it in her own city, let alone while in uniform. But tonight, she wasn't interested in causing a scene. She just wanted to get home. Paul stepped out of his vehicle, his demeanor already set. He carried himself with an air of authority, though it was clear from his body language that this was more about intimidation than genuine concern. Tatiana watched him approach, She had seen this type of officer before, aggressive, looking for a reason to exert power. She remained calm, knowing that reacting too quickly would only escalate the situation. "Evening," Paul said curtly, his hand resting on the handle of his gun as if ready to draw at a moment's notice. Tatiana gave a small nod, her face neutral. "Evening, officer." "Is there something wrong?" Paul's eyes narrowed. "You got any reason to be in this area tonight? You live around here?" Tatiana raised an eyebrow. "I'm just passing through, stopping for gas." His suspicions grew. "You know this area's been under heavy surveillance, right? Lot of criminal activity. You mind stepping away from the car for a second?" Tatiana knew where this was going. The tone in his voice wasn't one of genuine inquiry, but of someone who had already made up their mind. She decided to play it by the book. "I'm fueling up my car, officer. Is there a reason I'm being stopped?" Paul's patience was wearing thin. To him, she was being evasive, and in his mind, that was enough to warrant further action. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice more forceful now. Tatiana paused for a moment, considering her options. She had done nothing wrong, and there was no legitimate reason for this interaction, but she also knew that asserting her authority too soon could lead to unnecessary conflict. Keeping her expression calm, she reached into her car to retrieve her documents. As Tatiana handed over her license and registration, Paul Riley snatched the documents from her hand with barely a glance at her. His mind was already clouded with the assumptions he had formed the moment he saw her step out of her car. His attitude was aggressive, and Tatiana could feel it seeping into the air between them. He was determined to find something wrong, something to justify this stop. Paul took a step back, scanning her documents with disinterest. "Where are you coming from tonight?" he asked, his voice sharp, almost accusatory. Tatiana remained composed, keeping her answers short and direct. "I'm coming from work." Paul glanced at her with skepticism. Work? And what kind of work would that be? His question wasn't out of curiosity but condescension. To him, she didn't look like someone who belonged to a respectable profession, let alone someone with authority. "I'm in law enforcement," Tatiana responded calmly, though she deliberately withheld the details of her rank. She wasn't trying to pull rank yet, still giving him the benefit of the doubt, hoping the situation wouldn't escalate further. Paul's eyes narrowed. He wasn't buying it. Law enforcement? Huh? And what department would that be? His hand rested once more on his belt, not quite touching his weapon, but close enough to send a clear message of intimidation. "City Police," Tatiana answered, still calm but starting to feel the weight of the encounter growing. She knew that her rank as a captain should have ended this interaction immediately, but she had dealt with officers like Paul before, officers who couldn't see beyond their biases, who let their preconceived notions cloud their judgment. Officers who saw a black woman in a predominantly white area and immediately assumed the worst. Paul didn't bother to hide his disbelief. "Yeah, sure. And I'm the chief of police." He spat the words out with derision. "Step out of the vehicle." Tatiana looked at him, her calm exterior never wavering. She knew she had done nothing wrong, but she also knew that refusing could escalate things quickly. She hesitated for a brief moment, weighing her options, before stepping out of the car. As she did, she could feel the eyes of the few people at the gas station watching the situation unfold. Paul gestured for her to stand to the side of the vehicle, his eyes scanning her up and down with clear judgment. He then made a show of walking around her car, pretending to inspect it for any suspicious signs. His movements were slow and deliberate, designed to prolong the encounter and push her patience. "You got anything in this car I should know about?" Paul asked as he crouched down to peek into the backseat. "Weapons, drugs, anything illegal?" "No," Tatiana said firmly. "Nothing at all." Paul shot her a look, as if daring her to contradict herself. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. He moved to the back of the car and, without any hesitation, opened the trunk. Tatiana clenched her jaw but remained silent, watching as he rummaged through her belongings. There was nothing to hide, nothing illegal or suspicious, but she could feel the situation taking a darker turn. Then it happened. Paul stood up straight, a small, unremarkable baggie in his hand. His expression shifted, a twisted grin spreading across his face. He held it up for her to see, shaking it slightly, as if to make the contents more obvious. Tatiana's eyes narrowed. She recognized the bag, but it didn't belong to her. It hadn't been in her car when she left work. Her heart started to race, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not mine." Paul let out a bitter chuckle. "Sure, it's not. Every suspect says the same thing." He stepped closer, holding the bag in front of her face. "You're in a lot of trouble now. This is enough to bring you in for possession." Tatiana's mind raced. She knew exactly what was happening. The bag had been planted. She had no idea when or how he had done it, but she knew he had slipped it into her car while she wasn't looking. The realization sent a wave of anger through her, but she kept her composure. She couldn't afford to lose control now. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice level but firm. "I'm telling you, that's not mine." Paul's expression hardened. "You expect me to believe that? I have the evidence right here. Looks like you're heading downtown tonight." Tatiana took a deep breath, her mind calculating her next move. She could reveal her rank right now and likely put an end to this. But something told her that Paul wouldn't back down even if she did. He was too far gone, too committed to his narrative, and if she pulled rank now, it might make things worse. She had to be smart about this. "You have no right to arrest me," Tatiana said, her voice steady. "There's no probable cause. I've done nothing wrong." Paul scoffed, stepping back and gesturing to the bag. "I'd say this is probable cause. Now turn around and put your hands behind your back." Tatiana stood her ground, not moving. "This is an illegal stop," she said. "I know my rights. You don't have any reason to take me in." But Paul wasn't listening anymore. His face twisted with anger, and he reached for his handcuffs. "I said turn around," he barked, stepping toward her with the cuffs in his hand. Tatiana's pulse quickened, but she didn't move. "I'm a captain in the police department," she finally said, her voice sharp, hoping the revelation would stop him in his tracks. But it didn't. Paul froze for only a second, his expression flickering with disbelief. Then, just as quickly, he shook his head, dismissing her words. "Captain?" "Yeah, right," he sneered. "And I'm the president. Get on the ground." Without waiting for her compliance, Paul lunged forward, grabbing Tatiana by the arm and forcing her to the ground. The sudden force of his actions caught her off guard, and she hit the pavement hard, her head swimming from the impact. Paul's knee pressed into her back as he roughly cuffed her wrists behind her. Resisting arrest now, Paul growled as he tightened the cuffs. "This just keeps getting better." Tatiana winced, pain shooting through her wrists, but she stayed silent. She knew better than to give him the satisfaction of hearing her struggle. But as the cold metal of the cuffs bit into her skin, she realized just how far this had spiraled out of control. She was no longer just dealing with an overzealous cop. This was personal for him, and he wouldn't stop until he had made an example of her. As she lay on the ground, her face pressed against the rough concrete, she knew that the next few hours would determine everything. This was no longer about a routine traffic stop. This was about surviving the corruption, the racism, and the abuse of power that she had spent her entire career fighting against. Tatiana Blake lay face down on the cold pavement, her wrists bound tightly behind her back, with the sound of Officer Paul Riley's heavy breathing filling the otherwise quiet night. The flashing lights of his squad car painted the surroundings in harsh, alternating hues of blue and red. The gas station, though somewhat deserted, had not gone unnoticed. A few onlookers from nearby cars and pedestrians stood frozen, their eyes wide with confusion and fear, watching the scene unfold. Some even began filming on their phones, though they kept a cautious distance, unsure of how far the situation would escalate. Tatiana felt the pressure of Paul's knee dig into her back, his weight making it hard to breathe. She had trained for moments like this, moments of high stress, of injustice, of peril. As a captain, she had seen more than her share of officers abusing their authority, but never had she imagined she would be in this position, pinned to the ground, powerless to stop the nightmare unfolding. "I told you to cooperate," Paul spat, his voice low and filled with venom. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You people never learn, do you?" Tatiana's heart raced. She had dealt with racists on the job before, but this was different. This was personal. She could feel his hatred in the way he pressed down harder on her back, in the way his voice dripped with contempt. But she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She remained silent, her mind working rapidly, searching for a way to de-escalate the situation without further endangering herself. Paul stood up, yanking her to her feet with a rough pull on the cuffs. He pushed her toward the back of his squad car, her steps stumbling slightly under the weight of the moment. As she regained her footing, her eyes caught sight of the small crowd gathering, some whispering, others watching in disbelief. She noticed a young woman holding her phone up, recording the entire encounter. Tatiana silently thanked her for that. "Get in the car," Paul barked as he opened the back door and shoved her inside. Tatiana hit the seat hard, her shoulders slamming into the interior with enough force to make her wince, but she still said nothing. She knew that whatever words she spoke now could be twisted, used against her later. This was about survival, and survival often meant staying silent. Paul slammed the door shut and walked around to the driver's side. Tatiana could see him glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with a twisted satisfaction, as though he had already won whatever sick game he thought they were playing. He pulled out his phone and, after a moment of hesitation, dialed in a report. The sound of his voice, low and smug, filled the car. "I've got a suspect in custody. Possible possession, heading back to the station." His words made Tatiana's stomach turn. He wasn't just detaining her, he was framing her. She had heard about cops like Paul Riley before, ones who thought they could get away with anything by twisting the truth. She'd dealt with officers like him in her own department, and it had always been her mission to root out their kind. But now, she was the target, the one being treated like a criminal. As Paul started the car and pulled out of the gas station, Tatiana's mind raced. She couldn't sit by and let this happen. She was a captain of the police force, and she knew the law inside and out. She needed to find a way to break free from this trap before it was too late. "Officer," Tatiana said, keeping her voice calm but firm, "you're making a mistake. I told you before, I'm a captain in the police department. This isn't going to end the way you think it will." Paul didn't respond right away. For a moment, Tatiana thought she might have broken through his wall of arrogance, but then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that filled the car with chilling certainty. "You still going on with that story, huh?" Paul shook his head, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "You think just because you say you're a captain, I'm supposed to believe you? I've heard it all before. You're nothing special." Tatiana felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she forced it down. She had to stay in control. Losing her temper wouldn't help her now. "You can check my ID. It's in the file you took from me. I've done nothing wrong. And you know it." Paul's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Tatiana could see his knuckles turning white, the tension in his body building. He wasn't going to listen to reason. Not now. He had already made up his mind, and nothing she said would change that. "I don't need to check anything," Paul said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've got enough to take you in, and that's all that matters." Tatiana sat back against the seat, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the system, about the corruption, the racism, the abuse of power that she had fought so hard to expose. And now, she was caught in the middle of it, with no way out. As they drove through the dark streets, Tatiana's thoughts shifted to her options. She needed to stay calm, stay focused. She had connections, people who would be looking for her, if she didn't show up at home, but she also knew how easy it would be for Paul to make her disappear for a few hours, long enough to fabricate evidence, long enough to make sure his version of the story was the only one that mattered. Tatiana's instinct told her that Paul was planning something far worse than just a routine arrest. She could feel it in the way he glanced at her in the mirror, the way his fingers twitched on the steering wheel. He wasn't done with her yet. They arrived at the station, and Paul parked the car in a secluded area behind the building. There were no other cars around, no witnesses to see what he was about to do. Tatiana's heart raced as she tried to anticipate his next move. This wasn't standard procedure. He was going off-book, and that made him even more dangerous. Paul got out of the car and opened the back door, grabbing Tatiana by the arm and pulling her out roughly. "Let's go," he muttered, pushing her toward a side entrance that led to a private holding area. Tatiana knew this part of the station well. It was used for high-profile suspects or situations that required discretion. But tonight, it would serve a different purpose. As they entered the building, Tatiana's mind raced, searching for any way to stop this. She knew that once she was inside, Paul would have even more control. She needed to act fast, but without provoking him further. "Officer Riley," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest, "you need to think about what you're doing. You're not going to get away with this. I know people who will be looking for me." Paul smirked, his grip tightening on her arm. "Is that a threat?" Captain, his voice dripped with sarcasm. "You think your fancy title is going to scare me? You're just another suspect now. No one's going to save you." Tatiana's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. She wasn't going to let him see her fear. "This is an illegal arrest, and you know it. You're going to lose your badge for this." Paul's smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. He pushed her roughly into the holding cell, the door slamming shut behind her. The sound echoed in the empty hallway, a harsh reminder of the isolation she now faced. "Enjoy your stay," Paul muttered as he turned to leave, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Tatiana sat down on the cold bench inside the cell, her mind racing. She needed to think, to plan her next move. Paul was dangerous, but she wasn't alone in this. She knew that someone would notice her absence soon, and when they did, Paul's lies would start to unravel. But for now, she was trapped, and all she could do was wait and hope that her colleagues would find her before it was too late. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Officer Greg Harris, a colleague of Paul's and an old friend, had been watching the events of the evening unfold from the sidelines. He had seen Paul's car pull into the station with Tatiana in the backseat, and something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him. Greg had known Paul for years, and though they had once been close, Greg had seen a darker side of his friend in recent months. Paul's frustrations with his career, his marriage, and life in general had begun to warp his sense of right and wrong. Greg knew Tatiana Blake. Everyone in the department did. She was a captain, one of the most respected officers in the city, and seeing her brought into the station in handcuffs set off alarm bells in Greg's mind. He knew that something was wrong, and he couldn't just stand by and let it happen. Quietly, Greg slipped away from his desk and made his way to the chief's office. He couldn't risk going to Paul directly. His friend had become too unpredictable. But the chief needed to know what was happening before things got any worse. As Greg entered the office, he closed the door behind him and took a deep breath. "Chief, we have a problem." The fluorescent lights in the holding cell cast a harsh, cold glow reflecting off the bare concrete walls. Tatiana Blake sat rigidly on the metal bench, her wrists still bound by handcuffs that cut into her skin with each small movement. Her mind raced, running through every possible course of action she could take. She had no doubt that Officer Paul Riley had already begun fabricating his report, twisting the story to make her look like the criminal. Her rank, her years of service, her spotless record, none of it mattered in this moment. She was alone, isolated in the one place that should have been her sanctuary. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Paul Riley's actions had shaken her deeply, But she wasn't one to panic. She had faced adversity before, though nothing quite like this. The racism, the abuse of power, it was all too familiar. Yet she had never been the direct target in such a blatant way. She'd always been the one investigating and reprimanding officers like Paul now. The tables had turned. Paul had disappeared into the main part of the precinct, likely in some back office, filling out his fabricated report. Tatiana knew that the longer she sat in this cell, the more control he would have over the situation. She needed to act. But her options were limited. Her phone had been confiscated, and there was no one around who could see or hear her. Just then, she heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. They were steady, deliberate, and growing louder with each passing second. Tatiana's muscles tensed instinctively. Someone was coming. Whether they were friend or foe, she didn't know, but she had to be ready. The door to the holding area swung open, and Tatiana's eyes darted toward it. Narrowing as a familiar figure stepped into view, Officer Greg Harris. Greg was someone she had known for years, a fellow officer with a reputation for being level-headed and fair. He wasn't part of her direct team, but he had always shown her respect, and she had a hunch that Greg wasn't just making a casual visit. Captain Blake, Greg said quietly, glancing around the room as if to make sure no one else was there. His face was tense, his eyes filled with a mix of worry and guilt. Tatiana remained silent for a moment, studying him. She wasn't sure how much she could trust him, but he was her only chance at the moment. Officer Harris, she said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. What's going on out there? What is Riley doing? Greg stepped closer to the bars of her cell, lowering his voice. I don't know exactly what he's planning, but it's bad. He's filling out a report now, something about possession of drugs, resisting arrest, the usual false charges. I tried to intervene, but he's gone rogue. He's not listening to anyone. Tatiana's jaw tightened. She had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed made the gravity of the situation sink in even further. You know I didn't do any of this. Greg, you know me. Greg nodded quickly. I know, Captain. I know this isn't right. Paul's been different lately. Angry, paranoid. I don't know what's gotten into him, but he's out for blood tonight. Tatiana leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Greg's. You have to help me get out of here. If Riley files that report, it's my word against his. He's already planted fake evidence, and we both know he'll make it stick if he's given the chance. Greg swallowed hard, glancing nervously down the hallway. Look, Captain, I want to help you. I do. But Riley's been tight with some higher-ups recently. He's got connections. I don't know how far this thing goes. If I make a move against him, I could lose my job. Tatiana could see the conflict written all over Greg's face. He wanted to do the right thing, but the fear of repercussions was holding him back. She understood that she had seen it countless times before, but this was different. This was her life on the line, and she needed him to see that. I get it, Greg, Tatiana said softly, her tone shifting to one of understanding. But think about this. If Riley gets away with this, what do you think is going to happen next? He's going to keep doing this to more people. Maybe worse. He's out of control. And if I go down for this, who's going to stop him? You know the system isn't perfect, but it's people like us who need to stand up when it's broken. You need to make a choice. Greg, help me, and we can stop him before this gets even worse. Greg's face paled as her words sank in. He knew she was right. Riley had been pushing the boundaries for months now, skirting the line between following the law and breaking it outright. But this was different. Framing a captain, that was a line that couldn't be crossed. I'm going to make some calls, Greg finally said, his voice steadying, but I need you to stay calm. I can't break you out of here myself. That would put both of us in a world of trouble. But I'm going to talk to the deputy chief. He needs to know what's going on. Riley's out of control, and the deputy chief isn't someone who'll let this slide. Tatiana nodded, relief washing over her. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. She could feel the weight of the cuffs biting into her wrists, the sharp reminder of her current situation. But now there was a glimmer of hope, a lifeline. Greg turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced back at her. "Captain, hang in there. This isn't over yet. I'll be back." With that, he slipped out of the holding area, leaving Tatiana alone once more. But this time she felt a sense of reassurance. Greg might be able to get through to someone higher up, someone who had the authority to shut this whole thing down before it spiraled completely out of control. Meanwhile, in another part of the precinct, Paul Riley was hunched over his desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he typed up his report. He was careful to leave no detail unaddressed, crafting his narrative with precision. Every lie was woven seamlessly into the story. Every action twisted to make Tatiana appear guilty. He even added a note about the planted drugs, describing how he had found them in her car after a routine search. His face was set in a grim expression of satisfaction. This was going to work. He had been waiting for an opportunity like this to finally assert his control over a situation that would bring him respect, maybe even a promotion. Sure, he had crossed some lines, but in his mind it was all justified. People like Tatiana Blake didn't belong in positions of power, not in his world. She needed to be taken down, and he was going to be the one to do it. Just as he finished the final sentence of his report, his phone buzzed on the desk. Riley glanced at the screen. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he answered it anyway. "Riley," he grunted into the phone. There was a brief pause on the other end before a voice responded, low and authoritative. "This is Deputy Chief Collins. I need to speak with you immediately. We have a situation." Riley's heart skipped a beat. Deputy Chief Collins? He hadn't expected to hear from him directly. Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" "We need to discuss the arrest you made tonight," Collins said, his voice cool and commanding. "I've received some troubling reports about how it was handled." Riley's grip tightened on the phone, his mind racing. "Sir, everything was by the book. The suspect was acting suspiciously, and I found evidence." "Cut the crap," Riley Collins interrupted, his voice sharp. "I'm not interested in your version of events right now. I want you in my office. Now." Riley's stomach churned. Something was wrong. Collins wasn't just calling to check in. He had information that could unravel everything Riley had been trying to cover up. "Yes, sir. I'll be there right away," Riley muttered, his voice tight with unease. As he hung up the phone, Riley could feel the walls closing in. He had thought he had everything under control, but now it seemed like the higher-ups were getting involved, and that was the last thing he needed. His mind raced with options, trying to figure out how he could spin this in his favor. But as he stood up from his desk and made his way toward Collins' office, a cold realization settled over him. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. He had underestimated how far Tatiana Blake's influence reached, and now he was facing the consequences. Riley pushed open the door to the deputy chief's office, his face a mask of professionalism, but inside, his heart pounded with growing fear. As Officer Paul Riley entered Deputy Chief Collins' office, the tension in the room was palpable. The air felt thick, almost stifling, and the sound of the door closing behind him echoed ominously in the small, dimly lit space. Deputy Chief Collins sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled, his gaze cold and unwavering as he watched Riley approach. Riley swallowed hard, attempting to mask his growing unease. His mind raced as he tried to calculate his next move. He had been so confident, so sure that he could control the situation, but now, facing the stern gaze of one of the highest-ranking officials in the department, he could feel his carefully constructed narrative starting to crumble. "Sit down," Riley Collins said, his voice calm but laced with authority. Riley complied, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He forced himself to maintain eye contact, even though the weight of the deputy chief's stare made him want to look away. "I've been receiving some very disturbing reports about an arrest you made tonight," Collins began, his tone measured but icy. "A captain. No less Tatiana Blake. Riley's stomach tightened at the mention of her name. He had been hoping that Collins didn't know all the details yet, that he could somehow spin this in his favor, but it seemed like Collins had been briefed far more than he had anticipated. "Sir," Riley began, but Collins cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't interrupt me." "Officer Riley," he said sharply, "I want to hear the full story from you, and I suggest you think very carefully about what you say next, because your entire career is on the line." Riley's throat went dry. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. He knew he had to tread carefully now. If he made even the slightest mistake, Collins would see right through him. "Well," Sir Riley began, his voice steady but tense, "I was patrolling in a high-crime area, just as I've been assigned. I noticed Captain Blake well. I didn't know she was a captain at the time acting suspiciously at a gas station. She was in an area where we've had multiple reports of drug activity. I conducted a routine stop, and during the search of her vehicle, I found a small bag of what appeared to be narcotics." Collins raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Go on." Riley hesitated for a fraction of a second, but he forced himself to continue. "Captain Blake became uncooperative. She refused to comply with my orders, and I was left with no choice but to place her under arrest. It was by the book, sir. I followed all proper procedures." For a moment, Collins was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the desk. "Proper procedures. Is that what you call this mess, Riley?" Riley's heart skipped a beat. "Sir, Let me tell you what I've heard," Collins interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "I've received calls from several officers who witnessed parts of this arrest, and I've reviewed footage that's already circulating on social media. Captain Blake, a decorated officer with an impeccable record, was humiliated, handcuffed, and thrown into the back of your squad car for what appears to be no legitimate reason. And that's not even the worst part." Riley's pulse quickened. He could feel the ground slipping out from under him. "Sir, there was probable cause." Collins slammed his hand down on the desk, cutting him off. "Probable cause? You mean the drugs you conveniently found in her car, the drugs that, from what I've been told, you planted?" Riley's face went pale. He had been so careful, so sure that no one had seen him plant the evidence. But now, with Collins staring him down, his carefully constructed lies were starting to unravel. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sir Riley stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "I found the drugs during the search. It was a legitimate stop." Collins stood up from his chair, towering over Riley. "Enough of your lies. Riley, do you think I don't know what's been going on? Do you think I haven't seen officers like you before? Officers who think they can abuse their power, who think they're above the law." Riley's mouth went dry. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. "You're done," Riley Collins continued, his voice cold and final. "As of this moment, you're suspended. There will be an investigation into your actions tonight, and I assure you, it's not going to go the way you think." Riley sat frozen in his chair, his mind reeling. He had known this might happen, he had known the risks, but he had never expected things to spiral this far out of control. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. Collins reached for the phone on his desk. "I'm going to have someone escort you out of the building. Hand over your badge and gun." Riley's heart pounded in his chest as he stood up slowly, his legs feeling like they might give out beneath him. "Sir, please just—" "Get out," Riley Collins said, his voice like ice, "before I have you forcibly removed." Defeated, Riley reached for his badge and gun, placing them on Collins' desk with trembling hands. He turned toward the door, his mind spinning with thoughts of how everything had gone so horribly wrong. He had been so sure he could get away with it, but now, as he walked out of the deputy chief's office, he knew there was no turning back. As Riley stepped into the hallway, two uniformed officers approached him, their faces grim. They were there to escort him out of the precinct, and Riley knew that from this moment on, He was no longer one of them. He was a pariah, an outcast, and it wouldn't be long before the full weight of his actions came crashing down on him. Meanwhile, back in the holding cell, Tatiana sat in tense silence, still processing everything that had happened. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, but she remained resolute. She had endured worse before, years of fighting against prejudice, discrimination, and systemic corruption within the police force. But this felt different. It was personal, and it was dangerous. Just then, the door to the holding area swung open again, and Tatiana's eyes snapped up. Deputy Chief Collins entered the room, his face stern but not unkind. Behind him stood Greg Harris, his expression filled with both relief and worry. Captain Blake Collins said, stepping closer to the bars of the cell, "I'm Deputy Chief Collins. I've been briefed on your situation." Tatiana met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "I appreciate your attention to this matter, Deputy Chief." Collins nodded, gesturing to one of the officers standing nearby. "Unlock the cell." The officer quickly moved to comply, and within moments the door swung open and Tatiana was free. She rubbed her wrists where the handcuffs had left deep, red marks, her mind still racing with thoughts of what had just transpired. "Officer Riley has been suspended," Collins said, his tone serious. "There will be a full investigation into his actions tonight, and I can assure you, Captain, that we will get to the bottom of this." Tatiana nodded, though the weight of the night still hung heavily over her. "Thank you, sir. But this isn't just about Riley, it's about the system that allowed him to operate like this for so long. We need to address the bigger picture." Collins looked at her for a moment, considering her words. "You're right, Captain. This goes deeper than just one officer. But for now, let's focus on getting you out of here. We'll take it step by step." Tatiana glanced at Greg, who stood silently in the background. He had been the one to step up, to push back against Riley's lies and get the attention of the higher-ups. For that, she was grateful. As they exited the holding area, Tatiana felt a sense of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this battle was far from over. Riley may have been suspended, but there were others like him, officers who thought they could abuse their power, who saw people like her as threats rather than equals. This was just the beginning of a much larger fight. As they walked down the hallway, Deputy Chief Collins turned to Tatiana. "Captain, I want you to know that the department takes this very seriously. You'll have our full support moving forward." Tatiana nodded, her mind already shifting to the next steps. "I appreciate that, sir. But this can't just end with Riley's suspension. We need to ensure that something like this never happens again." Collins gave her a firm look. "We'll do what we can, Captain, but change takes time." Tatiana glanced around the precinct, the familiar faces of officers she had worked with for years now watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Some looked ashamed, others unsure of what to say. She had always been respected, but tonight had shown her just how fragile that respect could be in the face of prejudice. As they approached the front doors of the precinct, Tatiana felt the cool night air wash over her. She took a deep breath, her mind clear and focused. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been mistreated, every officer who had ever abused their power, and she wasn't going to stop until justice was served not just for herself but for everyone. Outside the precinct, a small crowd had gathered. Word had already spread about the arrest of Captain Tatiana Blake, and people from the community had come to show their support. As she stepped out into the street, the crowd erupted into applause, their voices filled with solidarity and determination. Tatiana looked out at the faces of the people she had sworn to protect, her heart swelling with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as she stood there, surrounded by the voices of her community, Tatiana Blake knew one thing for certain: she was ready for the fight ahead. The air in the precinct was thick with tension, and Tatiana could feel it. Despite being released from the holding cell, The weight of what had transpired still hung over her like a dark cloud, but she wasn't backing down. Her resolve had only grown stronger. Officer Paul Riley's suspension was just the beginning. She knew that the system itself needed to be held accountable. Deputy Chief Collins had arranged for Tatiana to be brought to a secure room where she could begin to prepare her formal statement. As she sat in the room, her hands finally free of the handcuffs, her mind raced. She knew the kind of battle she was about to face. Riley wasn't the first officer to abuse his power, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. But this case would be different. This time she would make sure the truth came out, no matter what. Just as Tatiana began to gather her thoughts, there was a knock on the door. It opened slightly, and Greg Harris stepped in, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. Captain Greg said, his voice low, "I just wanted to check in and make sure you're okay." Tatiana nodded, grateful for his support. "I'm fine." "Greg, thanks to you." Greg shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just did what needed to be done. Riley's been out of control for a while now. I should have stepped in sooner." "You did the right thing," Tatiana said, her tone firm but understanding. "But this isn't just about him. It's about the culture that let him operate like this for so long. We need to make sure this kind of thing never happens again." Greg nodded solemnly. "I'm with you on that, Captain." Before Tatiana could say anything else, the door swung open again, and Deputy Chief Collins entered the room, his face set with a stern expression. He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from Tatiana. "We have a problem," Collins said without preamble, his voice steady but serious. Tatiana's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of problem?" Collins leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Riley's not backing down. Despite his suspension, he's already started contacting his connections, trying to spin the story in his favor. He's claiming you resisted arrest, that you were hostile, and that the drugs were legitimate evidence." Tatiana clenched her jaw, the familiar anger rising in her chest. "Of course he is. He's desperate, and he knows his career is over." Collins nodded grimly. "But that's not all. He's threatening to leak information to the press, claiming that you used your rank to intimidate him during the arrest. He's trying to make it look like this was a case of power abuse on your part, not his." Tatiana's fists tightened at her sides. This was exactly what she had feared. Riley was a dangerous man not because he was smart, but because he was willing to do anything to save himself. She knew he would stop at nothing to twist the narrative and make himself the victim. "Do we have any evidence to counter his claims?" Tatiana asked, her voice calm but laced with urgency. Collins sighed, rubbing his temples. "We have the video footage from the bystanders at the gas station, but it's incomplete. Most of it shows the aftermath of the arrest, not the lead up. It's enough to cast doubt on his story, but it's not enough to shut him down entirely." Tatiana thought for a moment, her mind racing through the possibilities. What about the other officers who were there? Someone must have seen what really happened. Greg, who had remained quiet until now, spoke up. "I've talked to a few of them, but most are scared to get involved. Riley's got friends in high places, and they don't want to risk their careers." Tatiana closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting out a slow breath. This was the reality she had been fighting against her entire career, a system where corruption was tolerated, where officers were more concerned with protecting each other than with doing what was right. "We can't let him get away with this," Tatiana said firmly, her eyes snapping open. "We need to find something concrete, something that proves without a doubt that Riley planted those drugs and fabricated the charges." Collins nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've already ordered an internal investigation, but it's going to take time, and with Riley trying to control the narrative, we're running out of it." Tatiana leaned forward, her voice filled with determination. "Then we need to move fast. What about the body cams? Did Riley's camera capture anything?" Greg exchanged a quick glance with Collins before responding. "Riley's body cam was conveniently turned off during the arrest, but there's a chance the dash cam in his squad car might have caught something. It's a long shot, but it's worth looking into. Collins stood up, his face set in a grim line. I'll have tech pull the footage immediately. In the meantime, Captain, I suggest you prepare yourself. This is going to get messy. Riley's not just fighting for his career, he's fighting for his freedom. He knows that if he goes down for this, it's more than just losing his badge. It's prison time. Tatiana met his gaze, her resolve unshakable. Then let's make sure that's exactly where he ends up. As Collins and Greg left the room to begin working on retrieving the dashcam footage, Tatiana sat back in her chair, her mind already preparing for the battle ahead. She knew that Riley wouldn't go quietly, but she was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about setting a precedent, about ensuring that no one else would ever have to go through what she had just endured. Hours passed, and the tension in the precinct only grew. Tatiana stayed in the room, reviewing every detail of the incident in her mind, readying herself for whatever twists Riley would throw her way. Finally, just as the first rays of dawn began to creep through the windows, Greg returned with a small smile on his face. "We've got it," he said simply. Tatiana stood up, her heart racing. The dash cam. Greg nodded. It caught everything. The moment Riley planted the drugs, the way he handled you during the arrest, it's all there. It's over for him. A wave of relief washed over Tatiana, but she didn't allow herself to fully relax just yet. She knew the fight wasn't truly over until Riley was held accountable, but for the first time since this nightmare had begun, she felt like she was finally back in control. "Let's take this to Collins," Tatiana said, her voice steady. "We're going to make sure Riley faces justice." As they walked toward Deputy Chief Collins' office, Tatiana couldn't help but think about how many others had been wrongfully accused. How many had suffered because of officers like Riley? This was just one victory in a much larger war, but it was a victory nonetheless. And she would keep fighting no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it became, until the system was cleaned up for good. The precinct buzzed with an electric tension as the news of Paul Riley's imminent downfall spread through the halls. Officers exchanged whispers and furtive glances, some still in disbelief that one of their own had been caught abusing his power so blatantly. But for Tatiana Blake, this was just the final chapter of a long, exhausting battle that had tested every ounce of her strength and resolve. Deputy Chief Collins had acted quickly once the dashcam footage was confirmed. He wasted no time in having Riley officially arrested, his badge stripped away as he was escorted out of the precinct in handcuffs. The irony was not lost on Tatiana as she watched from a distance. Riley, the very man who had tried to destroy her life, now faced the consequences of his own corruption. Standing beside Collins and Greg Harris, Tatiana took a deep breath. The weight of the ordeal still pressed down on her, but for the first time she felt a sense of justice. It wasn't just about her vindication, it was about sending a message to the entire department, to the community, and to officers like Riley who thought they were untouchable. "You did it," Greg said quietly, standing next to her as they watched Riley being led away. "You fought back. And you won." Tatiana gave him a small, appreciative smile. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without your help. Greg, you made the right call." Greg shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what I had to do. But you, Captain, you were the one who stood your ground." Tatiana looked over at Collins, who had been watching the scene unfold with a grim expression. "Deputy Chief, what happens next?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "Riley's gone. But this can't be the end. There are deeper problems we need to address." Collins turned to her, his eyes hard but filled with respect. "You're right, Captain. Riley is just one man, but he's part of a larger issue, an issue that's been festering in this department for years. His arrest is a start. But we need more than just this one victory. We need reform." Tatiana nodded, her mind already spinning with ideas. "We need a thorough investigation into the department's practices, and we need to make sure officers like Riley are held accountable before they can cause harm. This is about restoring trust not just within the force, but with the community." Collins agreed. I've already begun talks with the higher-ups about implementing new protocols, but it's going to take time. And it's going to take leadership from people like you. Tatiana met his gaze, understanding the unspoken request. Collins wanted her to play a larger role in the department's reform efforts. She had always been a leader, but this was different. This was about shaping the future of law enforcement, about ensuring that the next generation of officers understood the values of justice, equality, and accountability. I'm ready, Tatiana said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen again. Not in this department. Not on my watch. Collins gave her a nod of approval. Good, we're going to need people like you to guide us through this. This isn't going to be easy, but it's necessary. As they stood in silence for a moment, the reality of the situation settled in. Riley's arrest would be a public spectacle, no doubt. The media would have a field day with it, and there would be backlash from all sides. But Tatiana was ready for it. She had been through worse, and this time she had the truth on her side. Greg cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Captain, what are you going to do now? After all this. Tatiana smiled, her expression softening for the first time in what felt like days. First, I'm going to go home and take a long hot shower. After that, I'm coming back to work. There's a lot that needs to be done. Greg chuckled. I should have known you wouldn't take a break. Tatiana gave him a playful nudge. There's no time for breaks when there's work to do. This is just the beginning. As they left the precinct and stepped out into the early morning light, Tatiana was greeted by the sight of a small group of community members who had gathered outside. News of her ordeal had spread quickly, and they were there to show their support. They held signs that read "Justice for Captain Blake" and "End corruption in the force," their voices united in a chorus of solidarity. Tatiana felt a lump form in her throat as she approached the crowd. These were the people she had sworn to protect, and in this moment she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had always believed in the power of community, but standing here, seeing their unwavering support, reaffirmed her commitment to fighting for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone. One of the community leaders stepped forward, a woman Tatiana had met several times during outreach programs. She offered a warm smile and a hand of support. Captain Blake, we're so glad to see you out here. What you did, it gives us all hope. Tatiana took her hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you. This isn't over yet, but I promise you we're going to make things right. The woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes. We believe in you. We've always believed in you. As Tatiana turned to address the crowd, her voice carried with quiet strength. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. We have to stand together and demand better from our leaders, from our police, from ourselves. This is just the start, and I won't stop until every officer is held accountable, until every citizen is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the morning air, and for the first time since this ordeal had begun, Tatiana felt a sense of peace. The battle was far from over, but today they had won a victory, and that was enough to keep her going. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city, Tatiana Blake knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she wasn't afraid. She had faced down the worst of it and come out stronger on the other side, and now, with the support of her community and the determination in her heart, she was ready to lead the fight for real, lasting change.